there's so much music that is not out there right now in a major way that deserves performances and deserves attention from students and teachers. So we want to keep building this out.
Today, we're chatting with my partner on the podcast, behind the scenes, my business associate, my partner in crime. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and today is a deep dive into how the sausage is made here on the podcast with podcast producer, I guess we'll call him, Trevor Jones. Trevor wears many hats in life, but also here on the podcast. And we talk about it. I'm going to keep this short and sweet because we get right into it. Quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, the Bass Violin Shop, Texas Hill Country Bass Collective, A440 Violin Shop, and Colstein Music. More on them in a bit. But if you're ever curious or have been curious about what the heck are we doing here on the podcast with this blog? What is there any plan whatsoever? Well, that's what today's episode is about. It's the sort of thing that probably not everybody's super interested in, but a section of the audience is incredibly interested in. So I'll just put that up front. I had a great time chatting about this topic, and I think it's interesting, and I think it's stuff that you can apply to whatever project you have going on in your life, especially if you're feeling a little overwhelmed. So with that as bait, here we go with our conversation with Trevor Jones. Live, ISB 2019, Indiana University, with Trevor Jones, who has been both a past podcast guest and a longtime friend of mine.
Yes.
Wears many hats and has been working with me on the podcast since about the last ISB convention in 2017. And this is your first ISB convention, right?
That's right. It took this long to come down here. It's been such a good time so far.
Yeah. And I had the idea a while ago, but I just sprang it on Trevor like a few minutes ago. What if we just talk about how the sausage is made here in 2019, which is very different than before Trevor came on. Before that, it was all me, and I edited every little bit of audio, and I had no logo, and I had no plan, and things are really different now. So maybe just maybe give people a quick little background. We'll link up to your past episode, then let's talk about what we're doing here.
Yeah. So currently in Chicago, I play at the Marriott Theater, about 300 some performances a year. I teach at Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington, Illinois, and I have a studio that I teach out of Midwest Young Artists north of Chicago. In addition to that, I work with Jason on the podcast, and one of the things when we got together a couple years ago and kind of connected about actually working together, Jason and I just have these marathon hangs where we just talk about things that we really love, things that we want to do. And so we kind of just started with sharing this Evernote, these Evernote pages back and forth, and they had all these ideas. It's like, okay, we can't possibly do all of this at once. And so one of the things that I've really worked on with Jason is like, let's pick something and try to execute it. And one of the things that's been really cool about being part of this community now is hearing feedback from all the listeners about, hey, this was really helpful. And then maybe something will come up where we don't hear so much about that. So we think, okay, we don't really know if this is connecting with anybody. So we really, really love to hear from everybody that's listening to this podcast, because that helps us decide on what we actually want to do in the future. So, yeah.
And if we go back to, I think we started working on this together. I remember it was before I moved to my current place. So it must have been like spring of 2017, maybe a little bit before ISB. But, and at that point, I can remember back, I built things in kind of a dumb way, but I guess it works where I have two separate websites. I have this blog website and the podcast website. Whatever. Don't do that, folks. Just have one website if you're out there. But I should have made that decision over a decade ago. So here we've got this thing. Both websites looked, I will say, a little handmade.
Yeah.
You know, you go to the menu and there are like 20 options. They don't really make a lot of sense. Things are laid out kind of so-and-so, whatever. And one thing that I love about Trevor's got this great set of skills. First of all, he's a bass player, and we're friends, and which is awesome. But also, he is in a rock band called Mole Hill in Chicago, and has worked on the social media side and just the way that the site is presented, and has just a really good eye for detail. And I remember right about when you were starting to help me out. I think the Chicago Tribune did a piece on Mole Hill. Am I remembering that?
Yeah, that's right. The great kind of legendary Chicago journalist Rick Kogan did a piece on us, which I kind of still can't believe that happened.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I remember thinking to myself, well, there's some game right there. You're in the Trib with your and so if I remember right, and correct me and some of these details if I'm wrong, but I think one of the first things we did was kind of get a handle on the website.
Yeah. What do we want the blog to be?
So, and this is something that I hope is helpful for anybody who's either thinking of starting their own project or kind of tightening up their project, which is what I think we have done quite a bit over the last 2 years.
Yes.
So, like, how do you tighten up something like, let's just take the blog, and we're going to keep tightening it, but we've done some work already.
Yeah. Part of it, I think, is just, first of all, figuring out what is the thing you actually are trying to do here. And when I first encountered the blog way back in 2007 or 2008 when I moved to Chicago, it in some ways when I started working on 2017, I was like, okay, the general idea here seems to be Jason just wants to provide all of these different assets to the bass community. Okay, and they just span such a wide variety of topics. So how can we best present this in an organized fashion to the community that comes and visits the site? So one of the things that we just did was look at what pages actually get the most traffic, and then we figure out how we can make them face forward more on the website. For instance, we get a ton of traffic on the summer camps website, and that has been something we've gotten so much feedback on. So we immediately go, okay, this needs to be front and center. We put that on, on the header of the website. So there were just a lot of basics like that. What do people actually want, and how can we put that front and center? And then some of the things that didn't get much traffic, we've just kind of, taken that and put it in the background a little bit more. So it's nothing mind-blowingly, thoughtful when it comes to that. It's just being organized about it.
Right, and it's the thinking about testing things. And I've been reading a book recently called The Lean Startup, which is a great read for anybody really doing anything. In fact, that book talks about how you can have that mentality in a corporate culture. I won't go into it too much here, but good book, The Lean Startup. And this is talking about really listening to what the audience is saying and looking for and what people are actually digging into. And so one thing that we've done, if we're just thinking about the blog, and this is Trevor's idea, so thank you for this, but Trevor sort of realized that all these people had been a bassist named Michael Kurth in the Atlanta Symphony, who's a composer, started sharing all these arrangements with me, and he said, is there any way that we can just, because people go to the blog, can we create some sort of repository for these somewhere?
Yeah.
And I thought the answer to some of that, I thought was like, well, yeah. And so Trevor has built out, now I think that is one of the most popular things on the blog, is this music library that has been created. When I go in and I look at the statistics, I mean, and it's remarkable how many people are landing on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've actually want to expand, it's not really a store, everything's for free on it right now, but we really want to expand that into a place where all these composers now who are composing for bass, some of them are bassists, some of them are non-bassists. We just want to have an outlet where we can really connect the community to these compositions. Playing Bottesini is very important, and we still want to hear all the recordings of the Bottesini, but there's so much music that is not out there right now in a major way that deserves performances. And deserves attention from students and teachers. So we want to keep building this out. And so if you have music that you think needs to get out there a little more, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get it included on this library. And so continue to evolve the blog and work on the blog, and we're working on, every couple of years it's good to redesign, and so we're working on the next iteration. But for both the blog and the podcast, in the thought of just sort of like tightening up the presentation, I had Zippo in terms of logos or branding. And now Trevor and I, we're here at ISB 2019. We just unfurled our awesome Contrabass Conversations sign, which we will have up on social media and momentarily. Yeah.
And so talk about why do we do this branding? Why don't we just let let it ride like it was?
Well, one thing when Jason and I started working together, I just thought, Jason, you don't have a logo. This isn't the most important thing of all time, but it's pretty important. You have this nice audience that checks in with you every podcast that you do. Give them, across all your platforms. Let them know that you're in the Contrabass Conversations world. Why does anyone have a logo?
Yeah.
But so we actually got in touch with a good friend of mine, Scott Siskin, who is a Baltimore-based designer and artist, and he, we said we want to keep this really simple, very clean. Let's use the bass clef, and is there some way we can incorporate the 2 C's from Contrabass Conversations into this? And so that idea took us to about 8 or 9 different logo iterations, and we finally landed on the one that we're using now.
There are so many things to think about when you're practicing. Where do you even begin? Here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what to prioritize in your practicing.
First things first, you got to measure time. Time is of the essence. You want to get the highest return on your time investment, and the way to do that is through listening to yourself and self-recording. Almost everybody who reads the blogs of Rob Knopper, Noah Kageyama, everybody knows self-recording is absolutely essential. So we put it front and center along with time.
Recording yourself, measuring the time you've spent on particular sections, and so many other things are available in Modacity. I love this app so much. You can learn more at modacity.co. And if you visit our website, we've got a special offer for lifetime access to the app. Check it out. You'll love it. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. What happens if strings aren't quite the right size for your instrument? For instance, if you play a 5/8 bass, when strings are slightly too large for an instrument, the tension will be lower. And when strings are slightly too high for an instrument, the tension will be higher. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Do you need to play a bass beforehand that you purchase? Here's Gary Upton of Upton Bass on that topic.
I hear these kind of truisms stated by retailers like, you have to play the bass that you're going to buy. I think that's the worst thing you can say, because...
Great if you live in New York City.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
or have 10 grand you can spend on traveling, right? But sometimes you have to trust people. Right? And sometimes you have to trust someone's reputation, sending out those videos, and I can hear it and I can feel it, and I trust this company's not going anywhere, and da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what I tried, right? Erica really drilled home. I said, for a long time, give them more pictures.
Yeah.
Give them the videos.
Give them everything they need to make a decision.
The reputation of Upton Bass is stellar. People know, like, and trust them through all the great content they've put out online and through time and time again delivering on their promise of quality and consistency no matter what level of bass you're purchasing. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. I have no graphic design skills. It's one of those things that it's not challenging. I was just maybe fearful or hesitant to try to build something like that, or I didn't know where to start. So, But now that we have this, it's like a no-brainer in terms of the value, and we got this cool shade, and we've got T-shirts that we've been sending out to guests and eventually to the public in some capacity, but and stickers and magnets, and it's been great to see on social media these popping up. And I've gone to people's houses and I see the stickers on their bow cases, I see the magnets in bass studios, and so you're just starting to see that more and more. So it's very cool, and then also just tightening up the delivery of things on the actual site, instead of having, again, 20 different options when you land there, narrowing it down about subscribe, listen, and then Trevor's been great at just figuring out how to communicate in social media in a way that's effective and giving and in the spirit, which might seem easy, but is actually quite complicated. And that goes from, we have sponsors and sharing out different instruments or products that the sponsors have, or in the case of D'Addario Strings and we're at the D'Addario booth, D'Addario artists, and then also something that I think has been incredibly beneficial is Trevor got my email game going in a much better way. Email lists were always like the last thing on my mind, and I think I would go like 2 months without posting, and now we've got a couple emails a week. It's very focused. So just talk about that or the process or email lists or whatever.
Yeah, one thing that was really cool, Jason, as I'm sure if you've been on the websites, has this a widget that will come up and capture an email if you're willing to give it. And I couldn't believe how many people were signed up on this email list. I was like, are you sending anything out regularly? No, not really. Like, okay, well, let's at least once a week send out an email that covers just the topics and the folks that were on the podcast this week. So every Friday we put out an email that does that. And then what we started doing on Tuesdays, usually on Tuesdays, we put out another email that covers some links to another topic or links you to something on the blog that's more like kind of a deep dive. Hey, you might not have found this. And one of the most popular things that we linked to were just these Bach trios that Michael Kurth put up. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of people click through to these. And I think that's one of the coolest parts of my gig working with Jason is figuring out all the things that have been on the blog for years or new things that come up. What would be the most beneficial to the audience? So we really love it. Jason always gets all these responses back from these emails. Typically they're positive about, hey, we really love that you shared this. Thanks for shining light on this. So when if you're on this email list, and if you're not, you should sign up. Please respond and let us know if we're doing putting out content there that you really enjoy, and if you have ideas for something else, we really want to hear from you too. It's a real mix of items that we put out every week. So
I've heard this advice for years, and I'm glad I finally heeded it. This episode is brought to you by the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. Join them July 22nd through July 25th for their 6th annual Austin Bass Workshop. Come join friends from the area for 4 days of music, bass, and fun, and work with 2019 featured guest artist and former podcast guest Dennis Whitaker. Learn more at TexasHillCountryBassCollective.com. A question I like to ask people on the podcast is, what advice would they give their 18-year-old self? And here's Barry Colstein of Colstein & Sons answering that very question.
I think as an 18-year-old and, or even in my early 20s coming into the shop, everything like that, a lot of it was laid out for me. There was a plan, that I was given a plan, which I often say I've done a good job and I'm proud of what I've done with the shop, and I continue to be proud. But, I was given an opportunity, and I always respect self-made people, that weren't given that opportunity. It's what you do with the opportunity.
Barry has been providing bassists with opportunities through beautiful instruments, bows, cases, you name it. He's been doing this himself for 50 years, and the shop is celebrating their 70th year in business. Thank you so much for what you do, Barry. Check them out at Colstein.com, and thank you for sponsoring the podcast. But getting another person involved in your project, getting help is just so enormously beneficial, because I think about the podcast or the blog or other projects like that. I'm just in my own head so much. I don't have an objective perspective. And something that I really appreciate about Trevor is he's got this logical and kind of orderly step-by-step progression of, okay, well, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to get this happening, then this happening. And I tend to flit about a little bit more, and as we all do. But I think really whatever your project is, getting help is incredibly beneficial. And something that everybody's got an idea, and how many of those ideas come to fruition? Very few. Like the follow through is the challenge. So, any thoughts on just someone, maybe they want to start a YouTube channel, or they want to start building a following on Instagram, or they're in a band and they want to kind of get their act together. This is an incredibly wide topic, but any just thoughts from you, because you are somebody that I see as having a lot of follow through. Any thoughts on just how people can get over some of those roadblocks?
I think the one thing is that I think about a lot is being very narrow with your goal. What I struggle with this too. If I have a new project I want to work on or something like that, I think, oh my God, I want to do all these parts. This project might be pretty expansive, and I go, what am I actually trying to accomplish with this? What are we actually trying to do with this? Let's answer that question first, and then you build something around that. And because the problem, too, is when you cast the net too wide, it's all overwhelming. It can be too overwhelming, and then you don't do anything. And then that, to me, is like the worst. Oh, my God, I didn't do anything. Now I feel bad about myself that I didn't even try to do this. So, but asking yourself that question can take, it's okay if that takes quite a bit of time to refine and refine and refine. And then once you've answered the core, the core question, then you can try to build a strategy of executing the project, I guess. So that's something that when Jason and I have these huge brainstorming sessions, we get all these ideas, and then you just throw all of them out until you get to the one that you actually want. And then the one thing that I really love doing is like building a workflow. Like one of the things that I love about working on the podcast so much now, we have a team here there. Everybody's doing a specific step of it, and it's just completely streamlined now. And just getting the podcast out, I know it sounds really geeky, but I'm just like, oh my gosh, everyone knows how to put this and format it in the Dropbox. It makes my job easier with publishing and promoting it, and it just gets everything out in a really very organized fashion. So hopefully you who are listening to it notice that too.
Well, and let me talk quickly about that workflow, because I think most of you don't have a podcast. I realize that, or a project, or this might not apply, but it might be valuable in your life. So I realized in late 2017, I was getting real busy, and I was feeling like I felt when I quit the podcast for 5 years, that overwhelm. So I thought, I got to get some help. And so what I did, not that this may or may not work, but what I did was sit for a while and just try to think of how can you use help, because the worst thing is to build something that doesn't really work, and then you just kind of alienate people, and it's ineffective, and it's more, and if you're not careful, it can be more work. But so what I did was I put out a secret message on the podcast. It's not really a secret message, but I found an episode that I thought probably wouldn't be the most downloaded episode. And I'll tell you my reason in a second. And then at the end of the podcast, I put a call for help. So what I thought is okay, I'm not going to put it in the Christian McBride episode because a lot of people might be new. I'm going to put it in one that I only think true fans would listen to, and I'm going to put it at the end because only the true fans going to listen to that one to the end. And so I said, I just need some help with audio. Is anybody? And Steve Hinchy and Michael Cooper reached out, and they both were like, oh yeah, we have audio backgrounds and we'd love to. So they edit the podcast. I then put out another call for help. I don't even remember how structured it was, but Mitch Mooring got back in touch and said, oh yeah, I do audio editing, I'd love to help. And then after this system got in place, I put out another call about kind of synthesizing all this material, and Krista Copper got in touch. And this team has worked so well. So what the flow is we have a Dropbox folder that is, I don't remember what it's called, something like podcasts or something exciting like that. So there are 6 folders in there. Folder 1 is not as just like items that we use to assemble the podcast. I think I'm getting this right. I might be getting it wrong, whatever. But there's a folder of just like intros, outros, adverts, that sort of thing. Then there's the folder for things that are not edited yet. Like I do a talk like this one for Trevor, it's going to go in that folder, not edited. Then what I do is I email either Steve or Mike and I say, hey, new one for you to edit. And they edit it. They then move it into the edited folder. So that's the next step. And they let me know. Then I add record an intro, record an outro, add any show notes and that sort of thing, and I put it in the next folder, which is ready for assembly. Then and then I email Mitch. Mitch sets it all up and then emails Trevor and me, and then that's Trevor's cue to know that there's something in the queue ready to go. We have a schedule, we have a publishing schedule Monday and Thursday, so we know that's going to happen. And within Dropbox, we have the episode number, we have the date it's going to come out, and all those items, and it's been working great. And then Krista goes through after it comes out and archives it. So that's how this thing has been built, and that's how it works. Am I missing anything?
No, that's it. And one of the most exciting things about Krista's work with archiving is some of the more popular episodes in the last couple years have been some of these episodes where Krista will archive things that have to do with like a certain topic.
Yep.
And then we're able to put this podcast out that, you know, draws back a couple hundred podcasts ago, and it really ties together all of these great bassists' input about this one topic. And it just makes for a really focused and useful episode.
Yep.
And they've clearly been connecting because the stats and feedback we've gotten on those are great.
Yeah.
So if there are topics that you want to hear about,
reach out to us, feedback at Contrabass Conversations. You can't steal Trevor from me. I won't let you, but if you got a project, he's awesome. Trevor at contrabassconversations.com.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening.
Yeah.
And it's good to hang here at ISB.
yeah, great to be with you, man.
Let's go and listen to some bass now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trevor. And like I said in there, you cannot steal Trevor from me, please. I don't know what I would do, but if you are looking for a little bit of advice on any sort of project you've got coming up, Trevor's a great resource. Trevor at contrabassconversations.com. So thank you to Trevor, and thank you to the rest of the team at Contrabass Conversations, Michael Cooper and Steve Hinchy, who edit the audio for all of these episodes. Trevor, who we've already obviously mentioned at great length in this episode, and also award-winning bass luthier bass maker rather, Mitch Mooring, who's making beautiful basses, and one of them just won a silver medal for tone at the 2019 ISB convention. That's super cool. And thank you also Krista Copper, who I had on the podcast recently about her podcast, The Backstage Creative, and Krista archives and catalogs everything we talk about so we can do best of episodes, future projects where we synthesize all of this content. And it's a lot of content, folks. So thank you to the whole team. I really appreciate it. I am your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.